The stagnation crisis, decoding the biology of relief. It begins as a silent pressure, a physiological gridlock that disrupts the body's delicate equilibrium and plagues millions with chronic stasis. This is not merely a minor inconvenience, it is a breakdown of the enteric infrastructure, a complex interplay of hydration, motility, and neurological signaling gone awry. We have synthesized centuries of natural wisdom with modern gastroenterological data to curate the definitive protocol for restoring internal rhythm without pharmaceutical intervention. The investigation into restoring flow starts with the most essential compound in the known universe.
The hydrological engine, the primacy of systemic saturation. To understand the foundational remedy for constipation, one must first view the human body not merely as a biological vessel, but as a complex hydrological engine, where water functions as the primary solvent, coolant, and transport medium. The recommendation to drink more water is often dismissed as pedestrian advice, a throwaway line in the pantheon of medical wellness, yet it represents the single most critical variable in the mechanics of elimination. The large intestine, or colon, operates fundamentally as a reclamation facility. Its evolutionary mandate is efficient resource management, specifically the reabsorption of fluids to prevent dehydration. When a human being consumes food, the digestive process turns solids into a semi-liquid slurry known as chyme. As this chyme passes from the small intestine into the cecum and begins its ascent up the ascending colon, it is largely fluid. However, as it traverses the transverse and descending colon, the epithelial lining aggressively extracts water and electrolytes, returning them to the bloodstream to maintain blood volume and cellular function. This is a survival mechanism honed over millennia of scarcity, designed to keep the human organism alive in arid environments. Constipation, therefore, can be viewed as a hydrological crisis, where the colon has performed its job too well. When systemic hydration levels are suboptimal, the body prioritizes the hydration of critical organs, the brain, the heart, and the lungs, over the lubrication of waste. The colon receives a hormonal directive, primarily mediated by aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone, to extract every possible molecule of H2O from the forming stool. The result is a desiccation process that transforms what should be a pliable, hydrated mass into a hardened, segmented stone. This is not merely a texture issue, it is a physics issue. The coefficient of friction between a dehydrated, hardened stool and the mucosal lining of the sigmoid colon increases dramatically. The bowel wall must generate significantly more propulsive force, high-amplitude propagating contractions, to move this dry mass toward the rectum. This increased demand for force results in the straining and discomfort associated with constipation. Thus,
drinking water is not simply about washing things down. It is about maintaining a systemic surplus of fluid so that the colon is not forced to scavenge moisture from waste, allowing the stool to retain the volume and viscosity necessary for a low-friction transit. The biochemistry of water in the gut is a fascinating study of molecular polarity. Water molecules, with their unique hydrogen bonding, interact with the hydrophilic components of our diet. When water is abundant, it binds with soluble fibers and other waste products to create a gel-like matrix. This matrix is essential for bulking the stool in a way that is soft rather than dense. Without adequate water, even a high-fiber diet can become counterproductive, turning the fiber into a dense blockage rather than a sweeping mechanism. We must also consider the role of the mucosal barrier. The intestinal wall is lined with goblet cells that secrete mucin, a glycoprotein that forms a slippery protective layer. This mucus requires significant hydration to maintain its rheological properties. In a state of chronic dehydration, the mucus layer becomes viscous and sticky rather than lubricating, further impeding the transit of waste. The modern human exists in a state of perpetual low-grade dehydration, often substituting pure water with diuretics like caffeine and alcohol, which actively strip the body of fluids, thereby sabotaging the very machinery designed to eliminate waste. Historically, the connection between hydration and digestion was understood intuitively, if not molecularly, by ancient civilizations. The Romans, with their sophisticated aqueducts and public baths, recognized that water was the essence of health. In traditional Chinese medicine, the concept of dryness in the bowels is a specific pathological state, treated by nourishing the body's fluids, jin-ye. Yet in the post-industrial era, we have commodified beverages to such an extent that plain water is often the last choice. The rise of carbonated sugary sodas has displaced water intake, introducing high levels of fructose, which, while sometimes having a laxative effect due to malabsorption, ultimately contributes to systemic inflammation and metabolic dysregulation that can impair gut motility. The 8 glasses a day rule is a simplified metric for a complex physiological requirement that varies based on climate, activity level, and metabolic rates.
The investigative truth is that the vast majority of constipation cases in the Western world are precipitated or exacerbated by a failure to meet the baseline hydrological needs of the colon. Furthermore, the temperature and mineral content of the water play subtle but distinct roles in this remedy. While the molecular structure of H2O is constant, the vehicle in which it is delivered matters. Mineral-rich water, particularly water high in magnesium and sulfates, offers a dual benefit. Magnesium is a natural osmotic laxative. It draws water into the intestines through osmosis, softening the stool independently of systemic hydration levels. Sulfates have been shown to stimulate the pancreas to release digestive enzymes, aiding in the breakdown of food. This is why famous spa towns in Europe, such as Bath or Karlovy Vary, were originally founded around springs known to cure digestive ailments. The cure was essentially high-volume hydration with mineral-dense water. Conversely, the consumption of distilled or reverse osmosis water, while pure, lacks these electrolytes, relying solely on volume to do the work. The modern trend of alkaline water is largely marketing pseudoscience in the context of digestion, as the stomach's hydrochloric acid immediately neutralizes the pH, but the focus on water quality remains valid. We must also analyze the neurological component of hydration. The brain-gut axis is sensitive to fluid balance. Dehydration can lead to a decrease in the synthesis of neurotransmitters like serotonin, 95% of which is located in the gut. Serotonin is the primary chemical signal for peristalsis, the wave-like muscle contractions that move food through the digestive tract. A dehydrated brain is a stressed brain, and a stressed brain sends inhibitory signals to the gut, slowing down transit time to conserve energy and resources. This creates a feedback loop. Dehydration causes hard stool, which causes pain, which causes stress, which slows the gut, which allows for more water reabsorption, leading to harder stool. Breaking this cycle requires a deliberate, almost aggressive approach to water consumption. It is not enough to drink when thirsty. By the time the thirst sensation is triggered, the body is already in a state of deficit, and the colon has already begun its desiccation protocols. The investigative lens reveals that drinking more water is a remedy that requires strategic implementation.
It involves the bolus effect, drinking a significant amount of water at once to create distension in the stomach. This distension triggers the gastrocolic reflex, a neurological message sent from the stomach to the colon, commanding it to make room for incoming material. Sipping water slowly throughout the day is excellent for cellular hydration, but for constipation specifically, volume matters. A large intake of fluid creates a pressure gradient that physically encourages movement. This is why the timing of water intake, specifically away from heavy meals so as not to dilute stomach acid, but in sufficient quantity to flush the system, is a nuance often lost in general advice. Looking toward the future, the crisis of water scarcity and the degradation of tap water quality poses a threat to this fundamental remedy. As microplastics and pharmaceutical residues infiltrate municipal water supplies, the purity of the water we drink becomes a digestive health issue. Microplastics have been found in human stool, and their long-term effect on the microbiome and gut motility is a burgeoning field of toxicological research. If our primary solvent is contaminated with endocrine disruptors, the simple act of hydration becomes a double-edged sword. Thus, the remedy of drinking more water evolves into a mandate for consuming clean, filtered, mineral-balanced water. It is a return to the most elemental requirement of life. The solution to the stagnation of the bowels begins with the restoration of the internal river, flushing the intricate winding canyons of the intestine with the only substance capable of sustaining the flow of life. 2. The architectural scaffolding. Fiber is the vessel that navigates it. The directive to eat more fiber is perhaps the most ubiquitous piece of dietary advice in modern history, yet it is also the most misunderstood. To comprehend why fiber is the second pillar of constipation relief, we must delve into the structural biology of plants and the evolutionary history of the human digestive tract. Fiber is, in essence, the skeleton of the plant kingdom. It consists of non-starch polysaccharides, cellulose, hemicellulose, pectins, gums, and mucilages that the human small intestine lacks the enzymatic capacity to digest. This indigestibility is not a flaw, it is the feature. Because fiber survives the journey through the stomach and small intestine intact, it arrives in the colon as a structural entity, providing the necessary bulk or roughage that the intestinal muscles need to grip onto. The investigation into fiber necessitates a distinction between its two primary forms, soluble and insoluble. These two types of fiber function as the sponge and the broom of the digestive system, respectively. Insoluble fiber, found abundantly in wheat bran, the skins of fruits and vegetables, does not dissolve in water. It retains its structural integrity, adding physical mass to the stool. This mass is critical because the colon is a muscle that relies on mechanoreceptors. These nerve endings in the intestinal wall detect stretching or distension. When the stool is bulky enough to stretch the colon wall, these receptors fire, triggering peristalsis, the involuntary contraction that propels waste forward. Without the bulk provided by insoluble fiber, the colon remains dormant, waiting for enough waste to accumulate to trigger a contraction, leading to stagnation. Insoluble fiber essentially acts as a pacemaker for the gut, ensuring that the rhythm of elimination matches the rhythm of consumption. Soluble fiber, found in oats, beans, apples, and citrus fruits, operates on a different, more chemical mechanism. It dissolves in water to form a viscous gel-like substance. This gel lubricates the stool, allowing it to glide through the complex topography of the bowel with minimal friction. But the true magic of soluble fiber occurs when it reaches the microbiome. The trillions of bacteria residing in the human colon, the microbiota, possess the enzymes that humans lack. They ferment soluble fiber,
breaking it down into short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs, most notably butyrate, acetate, and propionate. Butyrate is a miracle molecule for the gut. It serves as the primary fuel source for the colonocytes, the cells lining the colon.
A well-fed colon lining is robust, energetic, and efficient at moving waste. Furthermore, the fermentation process lowers the pH of the colon, creating an environment hostile to pathogenic bacteria and favorable to the healthy flora that regulate bowel regularity. Thus, eating fiber is not just about mechanics, it is about farming. It is the act of providing fodder for the microscopic ecosystem that governs our digestive health. The historical context of fiber consumption reveals a catastrophic shift in human biology. Anthropological data suggests that our Paleolithic ancestors consumed upwards of 100 grams of fiber per day, derived from foraging wild tubers, fibrous fruits, and unrefined seeds. In stark contrast, the average modern American consumes a paltry 15 grams, well below the recommended 25 to 30 grams. This fiber gap is the direct result of the industrialization of the food supply, specifically the invention of milling techniques that strip the bran and germ from grains to create white flour. This process, intended to extend shelf life, effectively removed the digestive scaffolding from our diet. We are biologically designed to process rough, fibrous matter, yet we fuel ourselves with refined, pre-digested sludge. The result is a digestive tract that is chronically understimulated, atrophied from lack of use, and prone to the stagnation that defines constipation. The specific sources of fiber mentioned, vegetables, beans, and oats, each bring unique weaponry to the fight against constipation. Beans and legumes are powerhouse sources of both soluble and insoluble fiber, but they also contain oligosaccharides like raffinose. While infamous for causing flatulence, this gas production is actually a sign of active fermentation and microbiome engagement. The gas expands the bowel wall, further stimulating peristalsis in a pneumatic fashion. Oats contain beta-glucan, a specific type of soluble fiber that has been shown to normalize stool consistency, turning both diarrhea and constipation toward a healthy middle ground. Leafy green vegetables provide fiber alongside magnesium, creating a synergistic laxative effect. The structural complexity of these plant cells requires the stomach to work harder and the transit time to normalize, preventing the rapid dumping of sugar into the bloodstream while ensuring a steady, bulky arrival of waste in the colon. However, the reintroduction of fiber into a fiber-depleted system requires a nuanced, investigative approach. A sudden, massive influx of fiber into a dormant, dehydrated gut can lead to disaster, specifically severe bloating, cramping, and even impaction. If fiber is the broom, water is the lubricant. Using a dry broom on a dry floor creates friction and dust, not cleanliness. Without adequate hydration, entry number 1, increasing fiber intake can solidify the stool into an impassable mass, a condition known as a bezoar or simply a fecal impaction. The physiological adaptation to a high-fiber diet takes time. The microbiome must shift its population to favor fiber-fermenting bacteria, Prevotella, over the putrefactive bacteria, Bacteroides, associated with a meat and fat-heavy diet. This microbial shift can take weeks, during which gas and bloating are common side effects as the fermentation tanks of the gut come back online. We must also consider the role of fiber in sequestering toxins. Bile acids produced by the liver to digest fats are released into the intestine. If these bile acids are not excreted, they are reabsorbed and recycled. While efficient, this recycling can lead to the accumulation of toxic metabolites. Fiber binds to these spent bile acids and cholesterol, escorting them out of the body in the stool. This excretion prompts the liver to pull cholesterol from the blood to make new bile, thereby lowering serum cholesterol. In the context of constipation, this binding action prevents the irritation of the colonic lining by secondary bile acids, which can cause inflammation and dysmotility. Therefore, fiber acts as a detoxifying agent, cleaning the blood and the bowels simultaneously. The cultural shift away from fiber is also a sensory one. Modern palates have been trained to prefer soft, creamy, highly processed textures, the mouthfeel of ultra-processed foods. Fiber requires chewing, it offers resistance. The act of mastication, chewing, stimulates the production of saliva and triggers the cephalic phase of digestion, alerting the stomach and intestines that work is about to begin. By consuming soft, fiberless foods, we bypass this crucial signaling phase. Reclaiming fiber is a reclamation of texture.
Of the physical act of eating as a labor that sustains the body. It is a rejection of the smoothification of the diet, where everything is pre-blended, and an embrace of the complex cellular matrix of plants. In the future of nutritional science, we are moving toward precision fiber. We are beginning to understand that different fibers feed different bacteria. Resistant starch, found in cooled potatoes and unripe bananas, feeds specific butyrate producers. Inulin, found in chicory and onions, feeds bifidobacteria. The remedy of eating more fiber will evolve into a personalized prescription based on an individual's microbiome analysis. But until that technology is ubiquitous, the general principle remains an immutable law of human physiology. We are organisms evolved to process plants. The absence of plant structure in our diet is the primary driver of the constipation epidemic. To eat fiber is to provide the bowel with the tools it needs to function, the bulk to push against, the gel to slide upon, and the fuel to power the microscopic workhorses that keep the system moving. It is the restoration of the body's internal architecture, rebuilding the flow from the inside out.
3. The osmotic paradox, decoding the biochemistry of the prune. To discuss the prune is to discuss a fruit that has been unfairly relegated to the punchlines of geriatric humor, a botanical entity stigmatized by its own efficacy. Yet beneath the wrinkled, dark purple epidermis of the dried plum lies a sophisticated chemical weapon against intestinal stasis, a remedy so potent that it rivals and often outperforms synthetic pharmaceutical agents. The investigation into the prune, entry number 3, requires us to look past the cultural baggage, the nursing home stereotypes, and the marketing rebranding efforts to dried plums, and focus on the molecular density of this stone fruit. The prune is not merely a fiber delivery system, it is a complex pharmacological cocktail synthesized by nature, containing a trifecta of digestive stimulants: insoluble fiber, soluble fiber, and most crucially, sorbitol. The primary engine of the prune's laxative capability is sorbitol, a sugar alcohol or polyol that the human body is evolutionarily ill-equipped to digest. When a human consumes a glucose-heavy fruit, the sugar is rapidly absorbed in the small intestine, spiking blood insulin and providing immediate energy. Sorbitol behaves differently. The molecular structure of sorbitol, C6H14O6, makes it resistant to absorption across the intestinal wall. It acts as a molecular stranger in the upper digestive tract, passing largely untacked through the stomach and small intestine. Upon reaching the colon, this unabsorbed sugar alcohol exerts a powerful osmotic pressure. In a desperate attempt to reach equilibrium, the body floods the colon with water, drawing fluid from the surrounding tissues and blood supply into the intestinal lumen. This is the principle of hyperosmolarity. By forcibly hydrating the colon to dilute the sorbitol, the prune effectively liquefies the stool, transforming hard, impacted waste into a movable mass. This is not a gentle nudge, it is a hydraulic intervention. However, the efficacy of the prune extends beyond simple osmosis. We must examine the role of phenolic compounds, specifically chlorogenic and neochlorogenic acids. These antioxidants, which give the prune its dark, brooding color, have been shown in various biochemical assays to delay the absorption of glucose, but more importantly, to stimulate the enteric nervous system.
There is evidence to suggest that these phenolic compounds irritate the mucosal lining just enough to trigger a defensive propulsive response, a flush mechanism. This irritation is mild and generally harmless, but it serves as a chemical signal to the gut muscles to contract. Thus, the prune attacks constipation on two fronts. It softens the battlefield via osmosis, sorbitol, and signals the charge via chemical stimulation, phenolics. The historical trajectory of the prune offers a fascinating glimpse into human agricultural evolution. The Prunus domestica, the European plum, was likely cultivated in the Caucasus region near the Caspian Sea thousands of years ago. It was the Romans who recognized the utility of drying these plums, noting that unlike other fruits which rotted, specific varieties of plums would shrivel without fermenting, preserving their caloric and medicinal value for long military campaigns. The prune became a staple of survival, a dense energy source that kept legions regular and fed. In the United States, the history of the prune is inextricably linked to the Santa Clara Valley in California, which, before it was known as Silicon Valley, was the Valley of Heart's Delight, the largest prune-producing region in the world. The shift from orchards to microchips mirrors the shift in the American diet from whole, functional foods to processed convenience, a transition that parallels the rise in digestive disorders. The uprooting of the prune orchards was, in a metaphorical sense, the uprooting of our digestive health. We must also confront the prune's use phenomenon. The extraction of the fruit into a liquid concentrate creates a beverage of immense viscosity and potency. Prune juice is essentially a hyper-concentrated delivery system for sorbitol, while eating the whole fruit provides the insoluble fiber necessary for bulking, the Broom effect discussed in entry number 2. The juice provides a rapid onset osmotic shock. For those suffering from severe impaction, the juice is often the superior tactical option because it bypasses the mechanical breakdown required by chewing and digestion, delivering the active compounds directly to the colon in liquid form. However, this comes with a caveat, the rumble. The fermentation of sorbitol by gut bacteria produces gas, hydrogen and methane. This rapid gas production distends the bowel wall, which can cause cramping.
This pain is the price of relief. It is the feeling of a dormant system being kick-started back into life. In the culinary world, the prune suffers from a lack of imagination, often viewed solely as medicine. Yet in Moroccan and Middle Eastern cuisines, the prune is revered for its ability to cut through the richness of lamb and game meats. The tagine, a slow-cooked stew, utilizes the prune not for its laxative properties, but for its deep caramelized sweetness and acidity. This integration of the remedy into the daily diet is a lesson the West has forgotten. In cultures where prunes are a culinary staple rather than a medicinal last resort, constipation rates are markedly lower. The medicalization of the prune, treating it as a pill rather than food, has alienated the general population from its preventative benefits. Scientifically, studies comparing psyllium husks, the active ingredient in Metamucil, against prunes have consistently shown prunes to be superior or equal in increasing spontaneous bowel movements. A landmark study published in Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics found that subjects consuming dried plums reported better stool consistency and motility than those on psyllium. This is significant because it validates the whole food matrix theory, that the synergistic effect of fiber, sorbitol, and polyphenols working together is more potent than an isolated fiber supplement. The prune is a perfect pharmacological package, designed by nature to regulate the very animals that consume and disperse its seeds. Looking to the future, the prune industry faces a renaissance driven by the functional food movement. As consumers turn away from harsh chemical laxatives like polyethylene glycol, Miralax, or stimulants like senna, which can cause dependency, the prune is being rediscovered. We are seeing the emergence of prune extracts and probiotics infused with prune derivatives. However, the danger lies in the reductionist approach, trying to isolate the active ingredient and put it in a capsule. The magic of the prune is in its entirety. The act of chewing the tough skin, the ingestion of the pulp, and the slow release of sugars creates a sustained digestive event. To rely on the prune is to rely on a complex biological interaction that has kept humanity regular for millennia. It is the dark matter of the fruit world, dense, heavy, and undeniably powerful in its gravitational pull on the digestive tract.
4. The thermal ignition, the gastrocolic reflex, and the morning ritual. If the prune is the chemical key, warm water in the morning is the mechanical ignition switch. Entry number 4 explores a remedy that relies on thermodynamics, neurology, and circadian biology rather than nutritional content. The directive to drink warm water immediately upon waking, often before brushing teeth or consuming food, is a practice rooted in the ancient medical traditions of Ayurveda, where it is known as Ushapan, and traditional Chinese medicine, yet it is validated by modern gastroenterological physiology. To understand why this works, we must map the state of the human body after 6 to 8 hours of sleep. During sleep, the human organism enters a state of metabolic conservation. The enteric nervous system, the second brain lining the gut, slows down propulsive activity. The colon becomes largely quiescent, suppressing the urge to defecate to allow for uninterrupted rest. Upon waking, the body is in a state of mild dehydration and metabolic inertia. The consumption of warm water acts as a wake-up call to the viscera. The mechanism at play here is the gastrocolic reflex. This is a physiological reflex controlling the motility of the lower gastrointestinal tract following a stretch of the stomach. When warm water enters the empty stomach, it causes distension. This mechanical stretching sends a signal via the vagus nerve to the brainstem and back down to the colon, commanding it to evacuate its contents to make room for the new day's intake. Temperature is the critical variable in this equation. Cold water, while hydrating, causes vasoconstriction, the narrowing of blood vessels. When ice-cold water hits the stomach lining, it can shock the gastric nerves and divert blood flow away from the digestive tract to maintain core temperature. Warm water conversely induces vasodilation. It expands the blood vessels within the gut lining, increasing blood flow and oxygenation to the intestinal muscles. This thermal energy helps to relax the pyloric sphincter, the valve between the stomach and small intestine, and the smooth muscles of the colon. For a person suffering from constipation, the bowel is often in a state of spasmodic tension or clamping. Warm water acts as an antispasmodic, soothing the tight musculature and allowing for the rhythmic contractions of peristalsis to resume without resistance. The specific timing in the morning is non-negotiable.
The human body operates on a circadian rhythm that governs not just sleep but digestion. The colon has its own internal clock. High-amplitude propagating contractions, HAPs, the massive sweeping movements that move stool considerable distances, are most frequent in the early morning, shortly after waking. This is driven by the morning spike in cortisol, the stress hormone that wakes us up. By drinking warm water during this specific biological window, one is surfing the wave of the body's natural rhythm. The remedy amplifies a pre-existing physiological tendency. Drinking the same warm water at 4 p.m. does not yield the same explosive results because the circadian drive for elimination is dormant. We must also investigate the solvent properties of warm water versus cold. From a basic chemistry perspective, warm water is a better solvent. It dissolves fats and oils more efficiently than cold water. In the context of a digestive tract potentially coated with undigested lipids or mucus, warm water acts as a gentle detergent. It helps to break down food remnants and melt the structural integrity of hardened stool, much like hot water washes a greasy pan better than cold water. This concept of digestive fire, or Agni in Ayurveda, posits that cold water extinguishes the metabolic fire, leading to the accumulation of ama, toxins, or sludge. While Western medicine dismisses the spiritual terminology, the physical reality of lipid solubility supports the ancient prohibition against cold drinks during meals or immediately upon waking. There is also a profound psychological and ritualistic component to this remedy. Constipation is frequently a somatic manifestation of stress and holding on. The sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, inhibits digestion. The parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, promotes it. The act of sipping a warm beverage is inherently soothing. It mimics the comfort of a warm embrace or a bath. By dedicating the first 5 to 10 minutes of the day to a quiet ritual of sipping warm water, the individual shifts their nervous system into a parasympathetic state. This relaxation is crucial. You cannot force a bowel movement through sheer will. The body must feel safe enough to let go. The warmth of the water radiates from the stomach to the solar plexus, physically signaling safety and relaxation to the core of the body. The modern variation of this remedy is, of course, coffee. Millions of people rely on coffee to poop.
While coffee is effective due to caffeine, a stimulant, and chlorogenic acids, it is also a diuretic and can be acidic. The pure warm water remedy is the foundational, non-toxic version of the coffee habit. It provides the thermal trigger and the volume distension without the dehydration or the jittery adrenal spike. For the purist, adding a slice of lemon introduces mild acidity, which can stimulate bile production from the liver, further lubricating the chyme, but the water itself remains the protagonist. Looking at the physics of the flush, we must consider the volume. A mere sip is insufficient. The remedy typically calls for a substantial amount, 500 milliliters or more. This volume creates hydrostatic pressure. It turns the stomach into a reservoir that exerts physical pressure on the intestines below. It is a gravity-fed system. The water weighs down the stomach, which presses on the transverse colon, physically massaging the blockage. This is simple hydraulic mechanics applied to human anatomy. In our high-speed, technology-driven existence, the simplicity of warm water in the morning is its greatest barrier to acceptance. We are conditioned to believe that complex problems require complex solutions, pills, powders, surgeries. To accept that the solution to a chronic medical issue could be temperature-controlled tap water feels anticlimactic. Yet the investigation reveals that this remedy aligns perfectly with the biological machinery of the human animal. It respects the mucosal lining, it leverages the circadian clock, it utilizes thermodynamic principles to relax musculature, and it triggers the hardwired reflexes of the nervous system. As we project into the future, as antibiotic resistance grows and the microbiome becomes increasingly compromised by pharmaceuticals, these mechanical and thermal remedies will likely regain their status as first-line treatments. We may see the development of smart hydration systems that deliver water at the precise optimal temperature, likely around 50 degrees Celsius to 55 degrees Celsius, to maximize the vasodilatory effect without damaging esophageal tissue. But ultimately, the technology is irrelevant. The remedy is elemental. It is the reintroduction of flow into a stagnant system using the universal solvent, heated to match the energy of the life it sustains. It is the first act of the day, a baptism of the interior, clearing the debris of the past to make way for the present.
5. The kinetic catalyst, gravity, oscillation, and the sedentary disease. To comprehend the profound necessity of movement in the regulation of human waste, one must first confront the defining pathology of the modern era, the chair. For 2 million years of hominid evolution, the human gastrointestinal tract developed within a biological chassis that was in near constant motion. Our ancestors were persistent hunters and gatherers, covering vast distances across the savanna, traversing uneven terrain, squatting, climbing, and carrying. The digestive system, therefore, did not evolve to function in a static vacuum. It evolved to function in a kinetic environment. It relies on the subtle, rhythmic compression of the abdominal cavity, the gravitational shifts of an upright posture, and the hemodynamic pumping of the skeletal muscles to propel food from ingestion to excretion. When we sit for 8, 10, or 12 hours a day, as the vast majority of the industrialized population now does, we are not merely resting, we are mechanically kinking the hose. We are imposing a state of artificial dormancy on a system designed for dynamic flow. The physiological mechanism by which walking, specifically the low-intensity, rhythmic ambulation of 15 to 30 minutes, alleviates constipation, is a masterclass in biomechanical engineering. It begins with the simple force of gravity and the mechanical jostling of the viscera. The human colon is not a rigid pipe, it is a flexible muscular tube suspended within the abdominal cavity by sheets of connective tissue called the mesentery. When we walk, the vertical oscillation of the body, the slight up and down motion inherent in the human gait, acts as a gentle external massage. This kinetic energy is transferred through the abdominal wall to the intestines, physically shifting the stool, breaking up gas pockets, and preventing the settling of waste in the hepatic and splenic flexure, the sharp corners of the colon. It is in essence a gravity-assisted sorting process. In a sedentary, supine, or seated position, gravity pulls the abdominal contents downwards into the pelvis, compressing the colon and increasing intra-abdominal pressure in a way that hinders rather than helps movement. Walking restores the natural alignment, allowing gravity to guide waste through the descending colon toward the rectum. Beyond the gross mechanics, we must examine the hemodynamics, the blood flow.
Digestion is a metabolically expensive process requiring significant blood volume. The gut creates a massive demand for oxygen and nutrients to fuel the smooth muscle contractions of peristalsis. When we are sedentary, blood pools in the lower extremities and the gluteal muscles due to compression. Circulation becomes sluggish. A brisk walk acts as a systemic pump. The contraction of the calf muscles, the second heart, forces venous blood back up to the core, increasing cardiac output and ensuring that the gastrointestinal tract is well perfused. This increase in blood flow brings oxygen to the enteric muscles, optimizing their contractility. Conversely, high-intensity exercise, such as heavy sprinting or powerlifting, can sometimes have the opposite effect, triggering a sympathetic fight-or-flight response that shunts blood away from the gut to the skeletal muscles, effectively shutting down digestion. This is why the prescription is specifically for walking, not straining. Walking resides in the Goldilocks zone of physical activity, enough to stimulate blood flow and mechanics, but gentle enough to maintain a parasympathetic rest and digest dominance. Furthermore, we must consider the interaction between the psoas muscle and the colon. The psoas major is a deep core muscle that connects the lumbar spine to the femur, acting as the primary hip flexor. It runs directly behind the abdominal organs in close proximity to the ascending and descending colon. In a chronic sitter, the psoas becomes tight, shortened, and atrophied. A tight psoas can physically impinge upon the gut, creating tension in the lower abdomen that restricts intestinal motility. Walking is the natural antidote to psoas dysfunction. The extension of the leg during the stride lengthens and engages the psoas, creating a rhythmic internal massage against the colon wall. This deep internal kneading is inaccessible through external massage, but is automatically activated with every step. It stimulates the enteric nervous system, the mesh of neurons lining the gut, signaling that the body is active and that metabolic waste should be processed. The biochemical implications of movement are equally profound. Physical activity has been shown to modulate the hormonal profile of the gut. Exercise stimulates the release of motilin and gastrin, hormones that directly increase gut motility. Simultaneously, it helps to regulate cortisol, the stress hormone.
Chronic stress and high cortisol levels are known to cause spastic colon, where the gut muscles contract erratically rather than rhythmically. By engaging in a rhythmic activity like walking, particularly in an outdoor setting, the body metabolizes excess stress hormones. The repetitive nature of walking induces a meditative state, lowering the psychological barrier to elimination. There is also evidence suggesting that regular physical activity alters the gut microbiome itself, increasing the abundance of butyrate-producing bacteria independent of diet. This implies that we can literally walk our microbiome into a healthier state. Historically, the concept of the constitutional walk was a staple of medical advice in the 18th and 19th centuries. Physicians of the Victorian era, lacking advanced pharmaceuticals, understood intuitively that a sluggish liver or melancholy bowels were cured by a daily promenade. It was a social and physiological ritual. The postprandial walk, walking after a meal, has been practiced in cultures from Italy, the passeggiata, to China for centuries. Modern science validates this tradition. Walking immediately after eating has been shown to accelerate gastric emptying, moving food from the stomach to the small intestine more rapidly. However, for constipation, the timing is less critical than the consistency. The goal is to reduce the colonic transit time. Studies utilizing radiopaque markers have demonstrated that sedentary individuals have significantly longer transit times, meaning stool sits in the colon longer, drying out and hardening, compared to active individuals. The cultural shift away from movement is the silent architect of the constipation epidemic. We have engineered movement out of our lives. We use elevators instead of stairs, cars instead of legs, and email instead of walking to a colleague's desk. We have normalized the pathology of stillness. The modern office worker is essentially a zoo human, living in a confined environment that does not match their biological requirements. The rise of the standing desk and the treadmill desk represents a desperate tech-centric attempt to reclaim what was once free and automatic. However, simply standing is not the same as walking. Standing is static, walking is dynamic. The shear forces generated by the swinging of the arms and the rotation of the torso during a walk provide a torsional stimulation to the gut that standing cannot replicate.
In severe cases of constipation, particularly in the elderly or hospitalized, the loss of mobility is often the precipitating factor for total bowel impaction. In geriatric care, mobilization is a primary therapy. Getting a patient out of bed and walking down the hall is often more effective than a stool softener. It signals the body that life is continuing, that the organism is functional. When the body stops moving, the gut interprets this as a signal of dying or severe injury, and it slows down metabolic processes to conserve energy. Ultimately, the remedy of moving your body is a reclamation of our animal nature. It is a rejection of the stagnation that defines modern convenience. The prescription is simple but non-negotiable. The colon requires kinetic energy to function. It needs the bounce, the sway, and the pump of the human gait. To walk is to grease the gears of the machine. It is the most fundamental side-effect-free intervention available. Before reaching for a laxative, one should reach for a pair of walking shoes, for the path to relief is literally a path, one that must be walked, step by rhythmic step, to reawaken the dormant forces of digestion.
6. The bacterial terraforming, probiotics, fermentation, and the microbiome wars. If walking is the kinetic energy of digestion, probiotics are the biological software. We are now entering the microscopic universe of the gut microbiome, a complex ecosystem comprising trillions of bacteria, fungi, viruses, and archaea that reside primarily in the large intestine.
For most of modern medical history, the colon was viewed as a sterile storage tank for waste. We now know it is a vibrant, teeming rainforest of life, and the balance of power within this rainforest dictates the regularity of our bowel movements. Constipation, in many cases, is not a mechanical failure, but an ecological disaster, a state of dysbiosis where beneficial bacteria have been decimated and pathogenic or methanogenic organisms have seized control. To introduce probiotics like yogurt and kefir is to engage in biological warfare, deploying reinforcements to reclaim the territory and restore the rhythm of the gut. The mechanism by which probiotics alleviate constipation is multifaceted, operating on chemical, neurological, and mucosal levels. The primary drivers are the general lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. These organisms are lactic acid producers. When we consume them in fermented foods, they travel to the colon and metabolize carbohydrates that escape digestion. The byproduct of this metabolism is lactic acid and short-chain fatty acids, specifically acetate, propionate, and butyrate. This acidification of the colonic lumen is critical. A lower, more acidic pH in the colon inhibits the growth of pathogenic bacteria and, crucially, stimulates the enteric nerves to increase peristalsis. It is a chemical command. Acid signals movement. Furthermore, these SCFAs serve as the primary energy source for the epithelial cells lining the colon, keeping the tissue healthy and responsive. However, the efficacy of probiotics extends beyond simple acidification. We must look at the methane factor. A significant subset of chronic constipation cases is caused by an overgrowth of methanogenic archaea, such as Methanobrevibacter smithii. These organisms do not produce acid, they produce methane gas. Methane is a paralytic agent for the gut. It acts as a local anesthetic to the enteric nerves, slowing down transit time significantly. This creates a vicious feedback loop. Constipation allows more time for fermentation, which produces more methane, which causes worse constipation.
Probiotic strains, particularly Bifidobacterium infantis and Lactobacillus reuteri, compete with these methanogens for space and resources. By crowding out the methane producers and acidifying the environment, which methanogens detest, probiotics break the paralysis and restore motility. Among the probiotic foods, two stand as titans: yogurt and kefir. But not all fermented dairy is created equal. The commercial yogurt found in most supermarkets is often a nutritional imposter, pasteurized after fermentation, killing the bacteria, and loaded with sugar, which feeds the bad bacteria. Therapeutic yogurt must contain live and active cultures. Historically, the connection between yogurt and health was solidified by the Russian zoologist Elie Mechnikov in the early 20th century. Mechnikov, a Nobel laureate, observed the unusual longevity of Bulgarian peasants who consumed large quantities of sour milk. He isolated the bacterium Lactobacillus bulgaricus and proposed that aging and disease were caused by putrefactive bacteria in the gut, which could be countered by seeding the gut with lactic acid bacteria. This was the birth of the probiotic concept. Yet, if yogurt is the infantry, kefir is the special forces. Originating from the Caucasus Mountains, kefir is a fermented milk drink that differs profoundly from yogurt in its complexity. While yogurt is typically fermented by 2 to 4 strains of bacteria, kefir is fermented by a SCOBY, symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, a cauliflower-like grain matrix that houses 30 to 50 different strains of bacteria and yeasts. This diversity is its superpower. The yeasts in kefir, such as Saccharomyces kefir and Candida kefir, play a unique role. They break down lactose and produce microscopic bubbles of CO2, which can help gently distend the bowel and stimulate movement. Moreover, the polysaccharide matrix of the kefir grain, known as kefiran, has been shown to have anti-inflammatory and wound-healing properties for the gut lining. Kefir is an aggressive colonizer. Its strains are more likely to survive the gastric acid of the stomach and take up residence in the gut than the transient strains found in standard yogurt. The neurological connection, the psychobiotic effect, is the frontier of constipation research. We know that 95% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut, not the brain. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that regulates mood, but in the gut, it regulates motility.
It is the chemical key that turns the engine on. Certain probiotic strains found in yogurt and kefir have been shown to stimulate the enterochromaffin cells in the gut lining to release serotonin. This suggests that by eating fermented foods, we are essentially synthesizing our own prokinetic drugs. The gut-brain axis is a two-way highway. A happy probiotic-rich microbiome sends all clear signals to the brain via the vagus nerve, reducing the anxiety and stress that often clamp down on the bowel. The cultural narrative of probiotics is one of rediscovery. Before the advent of refrigeration, fermentation was the primary method of food preservation. Every culture had its fermented staple: kimchi in Korea, sauerkraut in Germany, miso in Japan, kefir in Russia. These foods ensured a constant daily influx of beneficial bacteria. The modern era of sterilization, antibiotics, and chlorinated water has severed this lifeline. We live in a clean world that has devastated our internal ecology. The widespread use of broad-spectrum antibiotics is a scorched earth policy. It wipes out the pathogen but also carpet bombs the native flora, leaving the gut vulnerable to colonization by slow transit organisms. The rise in chronic constipation correlates directly with the decline in fermented food consumption and the rise in antibiotic usage.
There is also the issue of mucosal integrity. The gut wall is lined with a layer of mucus that acts as a lubricant for stool. This mucus layer is maintained by bacteria. Specifically, Akkermansia mucinophila is a species that thrives on mucus and stimulates the goblet cells to produce more of it. Without a healthy microbiome, the mucus layer thins, friction increases, and stool passage becomes difficult. Probiotics found in kefir and yogurt help support the ecosystem that sustains this mucus layer. However, the introduction of probiotics into a compromised gut requires strategy. Like fiber, too much too soon can cause a die-off reaction or excessive bloating. When beneficial bacteria begin to kill off pathogens, the dying bacteria release endotoxins that can trigger inflammation and gas. The strategy is titration, starting with a few tablespoons of kefir or yogurt and gradually increasing the dose as the microbiome adjusts. It is a terraforming project, turning a barren or hostile landscape into a lush, self-regulating garden.
The future of this remedy lies in precision probiotics, tailored bacterial cocktails based on an individual's specific microbiome analysis. But until that technology is ubiquitous, the ancient wisdom of the ferment holds true. Yogurt and kefir are not just foods, they are living inoculations. They represent a symbiotic pact between humans and microbes that has existed for millennia. By consuming them, we acknowledge that we are not individuals, but superorganisms. We are outsourcing the labor of digestion to our microscopic allies. To cure constipation with probiotics is to restore the workforce, ensuring that the biochemical machinery of the gut has the operators it needs to keep the line moving. It is the restoration of the inner civilization. 7. The lipid protocol, friction, flow, and the lubrication of the lumen. In the grand mechanical design of the human gastrointestinal tract, we have discussed hydration, structural fiber, and chemical signaling. However, we must now address a principle of physics that is as applicable to biological entities as it is to automotive engineering, tribology, the study of friction, wear, and lubrication. Entry number 7, the utilization of olive oil or flaxseed, moves our investigation into the realm of lipids, specifically the role of healthy fats in reducing the coefficient of friction within the colon and triggering the hormonal cascades necessary for evacuation. For decades, the Western world waged a misguided war on fat, a dietary purge that inadvertently stripped the digestive system of its primary lubricant. The resulting epidemic of constipation can be viewed, in part, as a crisis of friction. To understand why olive oil is often referred to as liquid gold in the context of digestion, we must look beyond its culinary reputation and examine its behavior as a surfactant. The intestinal wall is a mucosal surface designed to be slippery. However, in a state of dehydration or low mucus production, this surface becomes tacky. When a bolus of stool is dried and the intestinal wall is dry, the resistance to movement, drag, increases exponentially. Consuming a tablespoon of high-quality extra virgin olive oil, particularly on an empty stomach, introduces a hydrophobic layer to the digestive tract. Unlike water, which is absorbed rapidly by the colonocytes, lipids have a different absorption rate and pathway. A significant portion of the oil remains in the lumen for a duration, physically coating the stool and the intestinal lining. This creates a slip layer, drastically reducing the propulsive force required by the smooth muscles to move the waste forward. It is, in the most literal sense, greasing the gears. But the efficacy of olive oil extends far beyond simple mechanics. The investigation reveals a sophisticated hormonal trigger mechanism. The presence of long-chain fatty acids in the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, triggers the release of cholecystokinin, CCK. This peptide hormone is the master switch of digestion. Upon release, CCK commands the gallbladder to contract and release bile. Bile is the body's natural laxative. It is a detergent that emulsifies fats, but it also stimulates peristalsis in the large intestine. By consuming olive oil,
one is essentially manually firing the CCK weapon, flooding the intestine with bile that acts as a chemical stimulant for movement. Furthermore, extra virgin olive oil is rich in oleic acid and phenolic compounds like oleocanthal, which possess potent anti-inflammatory properties. Chronic constipation is often accompanied by low-grade inflammation of the gut lining, colitis. By soothing this inflammation, the oil allows the tissue to return to a state of normal function and elasticity, facilitating the passage of stool without the pain associated with inflamed tissues. The historical lineage of this remedy is profound. In ancient Greece, olive oil was not merely food, it was medicine, fuel, and ritual sacrament. The olive oil flush is a folk remedy that has survived for millennia because of its undeniable efficacy. The Mediterranean diet, heralded as the gold standard of health, involves the consumption of liters of olive oil per person per year. It is no coincidence that traditional rural populations in Crete and southern Italy, who start their day with oil-soaked bread or even a straight shot of oil, rarely suffer from the stasis that plagues the butter-fearing low-fat dieters of the West. The low-fat craze of the 1980s and 90s, which replaced healthy lipids with processed sugars and gums, removed the natural lubricant from the American diet, contributing significantly to the rise in functional bowel disorders. We stripped the engine of oil and wondered why it seized. Parallel to the liquid intervention of olive oil is the solid-state lubrication of flaxseed, Linum eusiptissimum. Flaxseed operates on a dual-threat mechanism that distinguishes it from almost any other food source. It contains high levels of alpha-linolenic acid and omega-3 fatty acid that reduces inflammation, but its true power lies in its seed coat. The hull of the flaxseed is rich in mucilage, a gummy gelatinous substance that is hydrophilic. When flax seeds are ingested, crucially they must be ground. Whole seeds often pass
pass through undigested, this mucilage absorbs water and expands, forming a slime-like gel. This is different from the oil-based lubrication of olive oil. This is a water-based viscous hydrocolloid. This flaxseed slime mimics the body's natural mucus. For individuals whose intestinal goblet cells are underproducing mucus due to age, dehydration, or autoimmune issues, flaxseed mucilage acts as a synthetic replacement.
It envelops the stool in a slick, hydrated shield. Simultaneously, the ground seed provides insoluble fiber, adding bulk. It is a perfect synergy. The fiber pushes and the mucilage slides. Studies have shown that daily consumption of flaxseed can be as effective as lactulose, a prescription laxative, in improving bowel frequency, but without the cramping often associated with chemical osmotic agents. The flaxseed brings with it a host of lignans, phytoestrogens, that may also play a role in modulating gut motility through hormonal pathways, though this science is still emerging. The investigative lens must also focus on the quality of these fats. The industrialization of seed oils, soybean, canola, corn, has introduced oxidized, inflammatory, omega-6 rich fats into the diet. These do not function the same way. Highly processed oils can contribute to systemic inflammation, which can paralyze the enteric nervous system. The remedy specifies olive oil and flaxseed because of their specific molecular profiles. Olive oil's high monounsaturated fat content remains stable and soothing. Flaxseed's omega-3s resolve inflammation. Using a rancid vegetable oil would be counterproductive, adding toxic load to a system already struggling to eliminate waste. There is also a fascinating timed release aspect to fats. Gastric emptying is slowed by the presence of fat. This might seem counterintuitive. Don't we want things to move faster? However, by slowing the exit of food from the stomach, fats ensure a steady, metered release of chyme into the small intestine, allowing for optimal bile release and enzymatic breakdown. This prevents the dumping of undigested food, which can cause gas and varying stool consistency. The fat creates a paced rhythm. Moreover, the lubrication effect is most needed in the distal colon and rectum, the final stages of the journey. Fats that are not fully absorbed in the small intestine eventually reach the colon, where bacteria metabolize them into fatty acid soaps. These soaps are mild irritants, in the best possible way, that stimulate the colonic mucosa to secrete water and electrolytes, further softening the stool. The implementation of this remedy requires a shift in mindset regarding caloric density. A tablespoon of oil is caloric density, roughly 120 calories. In a weight-obsessed culture, this is often viewed with fear. Yet from a functional perspective, these calories are utilitarian.
They are not empty energy. They are the hydraulic fluid of the body. The refusal to consume adequate fat is a refusal to service the machinery. We see this in extreme dieters and bodybuilders who cut fats to near zero and subsequently suffer from severe impaction. The body creates a hard, dry, pebble-like stool because there is no lipid matrix to bind it together. Looking forward, the field of lipidomics is beginning to map the complex interactions between dietary fats and the microbiome. We are discovering that specific fats encourage the growth of specific bacteria. Olive oil promotes the growth of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, the very probiotics discussed in entry number 6. Thus, the oil feeds the microbiome while lubricating the chute. The future of constipation treatment may involve prescriptive lipids, tailored oil blends designed to optimize the specific frictional and microbial needs of a patient's gut. But for now, the bottle of extra virgin olive oil in the pantry and the bag of ground flax seeds represent the most accessible, historically validated, and physically logical tools for reducing the friction of life.
8. The suppression protocol, the neurology of denial, and the cost of holding on. Entry number 8 brings us to the most behavioral, psychological, and socially complex remedy on the list: don't ignore the urge to poop. This directive seems deceptively simple, yet it strikes at the heart of the conflict between human biology and modern civilization. The act of defecation is governed by a sophisticated neurological handshake between the autonomic, involuntary, and somatic, voluntary nervous systems. To ignore the urge is to break this handshake, a violation of protocol that leads to profound physiological consequences. We must investigate the anatomy of the urge to understand why suppressing it is not merely a delay, but a destructive act that actively worsens the pathology of constipation. The physiological sequence begins with the gastrocolic reflex and mass peristalsis, which moves stool into the rectum. The rectum is usually empty. When stool enters, the rectal walls distend. This stretching stimulates mechanoreceptors, which send signals via the pelvic splanchnic nerves to the spinal cord. This triggers the rectoanal inhibitory reflex, RAINR. The internal anal sphincter, a ring of smooth muscle under involuntary control, relaxes to allow the stool to move lower into the anal canal. This is the sampling phase. The highly sensitive lining of the upper anal canal analyzes the contents, solid, liquid, or gas, and sends this sensory data to the cerebral cortex. This is the moment of conscious awareness, the urge. At this critical juncture, the individual has a choice. The external anal sphincter is skeletal muscle under voluntary control. If the time and place are appropriate, the brain signals the external sphincter to relax. The puborectalis muscle, which loops around the rectum like a sling, loosens to straighten the anal-rectal angle, and evacuation occurs. However, if the individual ignores the urge due to social embarrassment, lack of a restroom, work pressure, or sheer busyness, the voluntary muscles contract tighter. The brain sends a stop signal. Here is where the damage occurs. The rectum is an accommodating organ. If evacuation is denied, the rectum relaxes to reduce the pressure. The urge subsides. The individual feels relief from the pressure, but the stool remains. This is the phenomenon of retrograde propulsion. The stool may be pushed back up into the sigmoid colon. Once there, it sits in a stasis field. The colon's primary job,
As established in entry number 1, is to absorb water. The longer the stool remains in the colon, the more water is extracted. A stool that was soft and ready to pass at 8 a.m. becomes a hard, desiccated stone by 2 p.m. By ignoring the initial urge, the individual has chemically and physically transformed the waste into something that is now difficult and painful to pass. This is the drying out effect, turning a routine biological function into a medical event. The investigation into holding it reveals a deep societal pathology. We live in a culture that stigmatizes biological functions. The shy battle or parcapresis affects millions of people who physically cannot defecate in a public restroom or when others are nearby. This social anxiety overrides the biological imperative. Work environments often discourage breaks. Schools limit bathroom passes. We have created an infrastructure that is hostile to the digestive rhythm. The result is habitual suppression. Over time, chronic suppression leads to rectal hyposensitivity. The stretch receptors in the rectum become desensitized. They require larger and larger volumes of stool to trigger the signal. The urge becomes fainter and fainter until it disappears entirely. The individual no longer knows when they need to go. This can lead to the development of a megarectum, a chronically distended, flaccid rectum that acts as a storage vault rather than a transit tunnel. The consequences extend to the pelvic floor. The muscles responsible for holding the door shut, the levator ani and external sphincter, can develop a state of hypertonicity or high tone. They forget how to relax. This leads to dyssynergistic defecation or anismus, a condition where the person tries to push but the sphincter paradoxically contracts instead of opening. It is a neuromuscular coordination failure caused by years of training the body to say no when it wanted to say yes. The remedy, don't ignore the urge, is essentially a retraining program for the nervous system. It requires the individual to prioritize the biological signal above social convenience. Historically, humans didn't have this problem to the same degree. In hunter-gatherer societies or even agrarian ones, the separation between life and bathroom was less rigid. The urge arose and it was answered. The Industrial Revolution, with its regimented factory shifts and the architectural segregation of the water closet,
Introduced the concept of holding it as a requisite for employment and civility. We are the only species that voluntarily delays defecation to the point of injury. Animals defecate when the urge strikes. They do not suffer from hemorrhoids and diverticulitis at the rates humans do. The correlation is undeniable. The psychology of the urge also involves the concept of safety. The parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, requires a feeling of safety to engage. Ignoring the urge is often a stress response. By stopping the process, we remain in a sympathetic, fight or flight state. Answering the urge is an act of surrendering to the body's needs. It requires a mental shift to view the call to stool not as an interruption of the day's important tasks, but as the most important task of the moment. The toxins and waste must leave the system for the brain to function clearly. Furthermore, we must address the morning window. As discussed in entry number 4, the high-amplitude propagating contractions are most vigorous in the morning. If this morning urge is ignored, perhaps to rush the kids to school or commute to work, the opportunity is often lost for the entire day. The colon goes dormant. The Goldilocks zone for easy evacuation is missed. The remedy implies an architectural restructuring of one's life to ensure that when the signal fires, there's proximity to a toilet. This might mean waking up earlier to allow for a relaxed routine, or identifying safe restrooms along a commute. The long-term impact of ignoring the urge is a slow creeping toxicity. Reabsorption of estrogen and other waste products from the stool can occur, contributing to hormonal imbalances. The physical pressure of the retained stool can compress the bladder, leading to urinary issues. It is a domino effect of internal crowding. The remedy is a plea for immediate action. It validates the body's intelligence. The urge is not a suggestion. It is a command from the enteric nervous system indicating that the payload is ready for departure. To cancel the launch is to invite disaster on the launch pad. In the future of biofeedback and wearable technology, we may see devices that detect colonic transit and alert the user before the conscious urge arrives, allowing for better planning. We might see a cultural shift akin to the normalization of breastfeeding or menstruation, where needing to use the restroom is destigmatized in professional settings. But until then,
The power lies with the individual to respect the signal. The urge is the voice of the gut. To silence it is to silence the mechanism of one's own detoxification. The remedy is simple but radical. When the body speaks, listen immediately.
The cost of delay is a hardened, painful reality that no amount of water or fiber can easily reverse once the window has closed.
9. The manual override, tactile intervention, and the art of visceral manipulation. In an era dominated by pharmacological solutions, where the default response to physiological dysfunction is to swallow a chemical compound, we have largely forgotten the most primal, intuitive, and mechanically direct medical instrument in existence, the human hand. Entry number 9, massage your belly gently, is not merely a suggestion for relaxation. It is a directive to engage in manual biofeedback, a physical intervention that bypasses the erratic signaling of a distressed nervous system to mechanically compel the colon to resume its function. This remedy operates on the principles of external motility, where the kinetic energy of the hands is transferred through the abdominal wall to the smooth muscle of the large intestine, breaking the inertia of stagnation. To execute this remedy effectively, one must possess a granular understanding of the anatomical terrain. The colon is not a shapeless sac, it is a structured, tubular organ approximately 5 feet long arranged in a specific architectural configuration, an inverted U-shape framing the small intestine. The path of elimination follows a strict clockwise trajectory from the perspective of the person looking down at their own belly. It begins at the cecum in the lower right quadrant, near the appendix, travels upward via the ascending colon to the hepatic flexure, under the liver, crosses the abdomen via the transverse colon to the splenic flexure, under the ribs on the left, descends down the left side via the descending colon, and finally curves into the S-shaped sigmoid colon before reaching the rectum. The gentle massage is in reality a technical tracing of this path. Rubbing the belly in a counterclockwise motion is counterproductive. It pushes waste back toward the beginning of the circuit, fighting the natural flow of peristalsis. The massage must honor the biological current. The physiological mechanism of abdominal massage is multifaceted. Primarily, it stimulates the mechanoreceptors located in the intestinal wall. These sensory nerve endings detect pressure and stretch. When the abdominal wall is compressed rhythmically, these receptors fire, sending signals to the enteric nervous system, the ENS, the second brain of the gut. This stimulation can trigger a local reflex arc that induces contraction of the smooth muscle, effectively jump-starting a stalled peristaltic wave.
For a colon that has become lazy or atonic, lacking tone, this external input serves as a pacemaker. It mimics the internal pressure that a healthy volume of stool would provide, tricking the gut into believing it is full and active. Furthermore, we must consider the impact of massage on the autonomic nervous system. Constipation is frequently a symptom of sympathetic dominance, the fight-or-flight state. When the body is stressed, blood is shunted away from the viscera to the skeletal muscles, and digestion is deprioritized. The sphincters tighten and motility slows. Slow with mixed circular touch has been clinically proven to increase vagal tone. The vagus nerve is the primary highway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state. By stimulating the abdomen, one signals the brain to lower cortisol levels, reduce heart rate, and redirect blood flow back to the digestive organs. This increase in localized circulation brings oxygen and nutrients to the fatigued colonic muscles and helps to resolve the inflammation that often accompanies chronic constipation. Thus, the massage is not just moving poop, it is rewiring the nervous system's immediate priorities. The specific technique often taught in clinical settings is the Pi-L-U massage, a mnemonic for the path of the hands. I stands for the vertical stroke up the left, massaging the descending colon. L represents the inverted L shape, moving across the transverse and down the descending colon. U creates the full inverted U shape, tracing the entire length from ascending to descending. This sequence is designed to first clear the exit, the descending colon, before pushing more material into it from the upstream sections. It is a logical hydraulic strategy. You cannot unclog a pipe by pushing from the top if the bottom is blocked. You clear the path retrogradely, then progressively. This method is a staple in nursing care for the elderly and those with spinal cord injuries, populations for whom the neural connection to the bowel is compromised. In these cases, the hand becomes the external brain of the gut. Historically, the practice of abdominal massage, or qi nai tongue in traditional Chinese medicine, dates back thousands of years. Taoist monks realized that the abdomen was the storage center for undigested emotions as well as undigested food. They viewed the knot in the stomach as a physical manifestation of anxiety, anger, or fear.
By manually working out these knots, they believed they could release the emotional blockage along with the physical one. This concept aligns with modern psychosomatic medicine. Many sufferers of chronic constipation unconsciously armor their belly, holding the abdominal muscles in a state of rigid tension to protect their core. This rigidity physically restricts the movement of the colon. Massage forces the individual to drop this armor, to soften the abdominal wall, allowing the organs the space they need to expand and contract. The tactile nature of this remedy also addresses the issue of visceral hypersensitivity. Patients with irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, often perceive normal gas and movement as pain. This hypersensitivity leads to guarding and further constipation. Regular, gentle, non-threatening touch can desensitize the area. It is a form of exposure therapy. By associating the sensation of the belly being touched with relief rather than pain, the brain creates new neural pathways that lower the pain threshold. The gentle aspect is critical here. Deep, aggressive poking can trigger a protective spasm. The touch must be firm but sinking, like kneading dough, respecting the resistance of the tissue. We must also investigate the physical breakup of fecal matter. In cases of severe constipation, the stool can become impacted, forming hard stone-like scaibula. These masses can become lodged in the haustra, the pockets of the colon, or at the sharp turns of the flexures. Manual manipulation can physically deform these masses, breaking a large, impassable log into smaller, movable pieces. It can also help to dislodge gas pockets that are causing distension and vapor lock, preventing the stool from moving. The hands act as external crushers and movers, performing the mechanical breakdown that the dehydrated colon can no longer manage. The cultural abandonment of this practice is a symptom of our alienation from our own bodies. We view the abdomen, particularly when bloated or constipated, with disgust. We want to ignore it, hide it, or numb it. To touch it is an act of reclamation. It requires the individual to interact with their own pathology with compassion and agency. It shifts the locus of control from the doctor who prescribes the pill to the patient who performs the massage. This empowerment is a crucial component of healing. In the future of gastrointestinal therapy,
We are seeing the rise of visceral osteopathy and specialized physical therapy for the pelvic floor and abdomen. High-tech devices that deliver automated abdominal massage or vibration are entering the market. However, the human hand remains superior due to its sensory feedback loop. The hand can feel the area of hardness, the pocket of gas, the section of spasm, and adjust the pressure in real time. A machine cannot feel the give of the tissue. The remedy of abdominal massage is a return to the most basic physics of life. Movement creates movement. Friction creates heat. Pressure creates flow. It is the manual override for a system that has stalled, a way to physically guide the body back to its rhythm when its internal compass has failed.
10. The chronobiological anchor, Pavlovian conditioning and the sacred ritual of release. We arrive at the final entry, the capstone of the protocol: set a daily bathroom routine. This remedy transcends the mechanical and chemical interventions of the previous 9 entries to address the temporal and behavioral architecture of human life. It posits that the human bowel is not merely a plumbing system, but a creature of habit, a biological entity governed by the circadian rhythms of the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain. Constipation, in many cases, is a form of social jet lag, a misalignment between the body's internal clock and the external demands of modern living. To set a routine is to engage in a profound act of neurological conditioning, training the brain-gut axis to perform on command through the power of repetition. The science behind this remedy is rooted in the gastrocolic reflex discussed in entry number 4, but here we examine it through the lens of timing. The body loves predictability. Every cell in the human organism oscillates on a roughly 24-hour cycle. The colon is no exception. Its motility follows a diurnal pattern. During sleep, colonic motor activity is suppressed to allow for rest. Upon waking, there is a surge in cortisol and catecholamines that stimulates the entire system. This is the morning window, the biological prime time for defecation. However, in the chaotic rush of modern mornings, alarm clocks, smartphone scrolling, commuting, rushing children, this signal is often drowned out by stress. The body learns to suppress the urge because the environment is signaling unsafe or busy. Over years, this suppression becomes the default setting. Setting a daily routine is an application of Pavlovian conditioning. Ivan Pavlov famously trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell by pairing the sound with food. Similarly, a human can train their colon to evacuate at a specific time by pairing that time with a consistent set of behaviors. If an individual wakes up, drinks their warm water, entry number 4, eats their fiber, entry number 2, and then sits on the toilet at 7:30 a.m. every single day, regardless of whether they feel the urge, they are digging a neurological groove. Initially, nothing may happen. The individual may sit for 10 minutes and produce nothing, but the act of sitting is the signal. It tells the body, this is the time, this is the place, we are safe. Over weeks of consistent practice,
the autonomic nervous system begins to anticipate this window. It begins to ramp up peristalsis in the hour leading up to 7:30 a.m. The urge moves from being a random, inconvenient event to a scheduled appointment. This remedy requires a radical recontextualization of the toilet itself. For most, the bathroom is a place of transition, a functional stopover. To cure constipation, the bathroom must become a sanctuary. The environment matters. If the bathroom is cold, brightly lit with harsh fluorescent bulbs, and the door has a broken lock, the sphincter will tighten. The routine involves creating an environment of relaxation. This might mean dimming the lights, ensuring warmth, and removing distractions. The modern habit of bringing the smartphone into the bathroom is a double-edged sword. While it encourages sitting for longer periods, the content consumed, work emails, distressing news, social media comparison, triggers the sympathetic nervous system. Stress clamps the colon. The routine should ideally be meditative, a time of letting go, in both the metaphorical and literal sense. We must also integrate the biomechanics of the sit into this routine. The standard Western porcelain throne is an ergonomic disaster for the human colon. Sitting at a 90-degree angle creates a kink in the anorectal angle. The puborectalis muscle chokes the rectum, maintaining continence. To defecate, this muscle must relax. In a squatting position, knees of hips, this muscle fully relaxes, and the kink straightens out, creating a clear path for gravity to do its work.
Part of the daily routine remedy involves the use of a toilet stool, like a squatty potty, to mimic this ancestral squatting posture. This anatomical adjustment, combined with the timing, maximizes the efficiency of the evacuation attempt. It reduces the need for straining, Valsalva maneuver, which protects the pelvic floor and prevents hemorrhoids. The philosophical implication of this remedy is a rejection of the on-demand culture. We expect our bodies to operate like machines, input food, output work, eliminate waste whenever convenient. But the body is an animal. It requires rhythm. Shift workers, frequent travelers, and those with erratic sleep schedules suffer disproportionately from constipation because their circadian anchors are adrift. For these individuals, the routine is even more critical. It acts as an artificial anchor in a chaotic sea. Even if the sun is up at a different time, the sequence of wake, water, sit provides a consistent signal of safety and function to the gut. The daily routine is the container that holds all other remedies. Hydration, entry number 1, works best when consistent. Fiber, entry number 2, requires regular processing. The prune, entry number 3, takes a specific amount of time to transit. By standardizing the input and the attempt at output, one allows the other variables to be tested and tweaked. Without a routine, it is impossible to know what is working. Was it the olive oil, or was it just a lucky day? With a routine, deviations become data. You begin to know your own transit time. You understand that the beets you ate on Tuesday appear on Wednesday morning. You become the expert of your own physiology. Moreover, this remedy addresses the psychological aspect of control. Constipation often feels like a loss of control. The body is refusing to cooperate. By establishing a routine, the individual reasserts agency. They are dedicating time to self-care. They are prioritizing their health over the demands of the external world for 15 minutes a day. This shift in priority reduces the subconscious stress that fuels the condition. It changes the narrative from "I can't go" to "I am giving myself the time to go." In the grand scope of the investigation, we see that the top 10 remedies form a hierarchy of needs. We start with the physical substrates, water, fiber, oil, move to the chemical stimulants, prunes, probiotics, engage the mechanical aids, movement, massage, and finally we arrive at the behavioral architecture, the routine. The routine is the ultimate synthesis. It is the recognition that we are not separate from nature, we are cyclical beings. The sun rises, the tide turns, and the bowel moves. To fight this rhythm is to invite stagnation. To align with it is to find flow. The cure for constipation is rarely a single magic bullet. It is a lifestyle calibration. It is the hydration of the stream, the structure of the vessel, the lubrication of the passage, and the timing of the release. The daily routine is the commitment to this calibration. It is the quiet, private discipline that ensures the complex, magnificent machinery of the human body functions not with a grind, but with a glide. It is the final step in the journey from the discomfort of retention to the profound release of release.